It is November 1st, and that is the start of Financial Literacy Month. The designation is the brainchild of a coalition of 7 organizations with the goal of improving financial literacy of Canadians. Now, part of the focus is mounting debt, and according to Statistics Canada, the average Canadian household owes more than $1.60 for every dollar that it takes in. TransUnion pegs the average consumer debt at over $27,000. That is not including mortgages. And a recent Sun Life poll says that 1/3 of Canadians plan to take debt into retirement. Now, to talk about all of these trends and how you might be able to deal with it, we are joined with Keith Emery. He's the Operations Director at Credit Canada Debt Solutions. Keith, thank you so much for joining me.
No problem, my pleasure.
So how do you know if your debt is out of control on a personal level?
Well, the obvious indicator is if you're falling behind in your debt payments or you're getting calls from collection agencies. Most of the clients that we see at Credit Canada are in this situation. But the key is to try and identify the problem earlier. You want to ask yourself some questions. Are you able to save at all? If you're not able to save, your budget might be squeezed, and that's usually going to lead to debt problems. Number 2, are you using credit to cover your expenses? If you're using credit to cover your expenses to make up for a shortfall in your budget, eventually that train is going to come to an end. And number 3 is whether or not your debt levels have risen over time. Ask yourself honestly, is your debt level this month higher than last month's? And if so, by how much?
So once we've asked ourselves all these questions and, they're perhaps not getting perfect scores on all of them, how can we go about solving them? I think you have 3 tips to get out of debt. Let's start with the first one, income and expenses.
Yeah, it's the most important thing. Whenever we meet with someone at credit counseling, we spend most of the time talking about budget. And you need to look at whether or not you can reduce your expenses or increase your income. That's step number 1. I know it's not possible for everybody, but that's where you start. And that's how you start to dig yourself out.
I'm wondering, with all of this talk about, Canadian households being so over-levered, are you seeing more people come into your stores and seek credit counseling? Is this a bigger problem than it was, say, 10 years ago?
I think it is. We are seeing people, but at the same time, some reports have shown that people feel they can cope with their debt levels. They're making their minimum payments. They're not falling behind. But we encourage people, take a deeper look. Ask yourself these questions, like I said before. And if you have these issues, you should come and see a credit counselor, because the sooner you get to the problem, the more options you have available to you.
One of the options that you suggest, refinancing. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, the basic rule of thumb is try and exchange expensive debt or high interest debt for low interest debt. This is always a good measure. It's not available to everybody. Some people are at a situation where no one's willing to refinance, but if they can, they should make sure that they try and refinance as much as possible. But even more important, if you do refinance, make sure not to run up that high interest debt after you've paid it off.
And is it important, can people, once they realize that they are in a situation that is perhaps troubling, is it important to always go to a credit counselor, or is this something where, people can manage themselves if they take the steps that you're talking about?
I mean, I'm a little biased. I'm always going to suggest you go see a credit counselor. There's no obligation to do anything, and we can discuss people's situations no matter how deep in debt they are, and evaluate what options are possible and what the implications of those options are. And importantly, we'll review your budget with you, because generally your budget is what tells you what solutions are available and realistic.
And at what point is personal bankruptcy an option? Is that, sort of the last possible thing once all those other things don't work out?
Yeah, generally we work down a spectrum, from refinancing into potentially credit counseling and then eventually insolvency. And again, that's usually based on the budget. If you're in such a situation that your debt level is really high and you can't get any kind of surplus income, you may be in a position where you have to declare.
All right, Keith, thank you so much for bringing these ideas to us, and happy Financial Literacy Month.
Thank you very much.
That was Keith Emery, Operations Director at Credit Canada Debt Solutions.
Now to